Silence. That is the first thing. Not the comfortable silence of early morning, not the temporary silence between subway trains. Absolute silence. The kind that has no business existing in the middle of Manhattan at 8:47 on a Tuesday. Every bird stops simultaneously. Every car alarm dies mid-wail. A construction crew on 53rd Street watches their pneumatic drills sputter out without explanation. Their instruments reading 0, their hands still vibrating from work that has simply ceased. A street vendor's radio cuts to static. A child stops crying. And above the city, 40 stories up, visible to anyone standing on the right rooftop at the right angle, a single crack splits the sky. Not lightning, not a sonic boom, something slower and more permanent. Something that looks, to the SHE-ELD satellite analyst who catches it first on her monitor, less like an atmospheric event and more like a seam coming undone. She has 3 seconds to report it before the crack becomes a fracture, and the fracture becomes something that has no word in any human language. The energy arrives before the being does. That distinction matters enormously. Most threats announce themselves through action. The Chitauri came screaming through the portal. Thanos announced himself through consequence. But this energy arrives the way a pressure system arrives ahead of a storm, the way the air changes before a lightning strike. It does not announce. It displaces. Every electromagnetic instrument in a 6-mile radius spikes simultaneously, pegs its ceiling, and then goes flatline. Not overwhelmed, but confused, the way a compass goes useless in proximity to a magnet strong enough to rewrite the concept of north. In the SHE-ELD Tactical Operations Center, 17 monitors display 17 different variations of the same message. Reading invalid, recalibrating, and then before recalibra. Tian completes, the sky above Midtown tears completely open, and through the wound steps a silhouette wrapped in violet fire so dense it swallows the light around it rather than adding to it. On every screen, the message changes. Threat classification, unknown. Threat level, infinity. Nick Fury sees the footage before anyone speaks. He watches the silhouette descend through the breach in silence, hands flat on the briefing table, jaw locked in the expression that his staff has learned to fear more than any raised voice. The expression of a man who has spent 30 years preparing for threats he couldn't yet name, and is now looking directly at the first one that genuinely concerns him. The energy signature does not match Asgardian, does not match Kree, Skrull, Chitauri, or any of the 17 extra-dimensional taxonomies SHE-ELD has spent the last decade building. It does not match anything in the database, which is a database that now includes the power signatures of literal gods. Fury watches the violet figure hover above Midtown, watches cars below begin moving sideways from the ambient pressure alone, as if the figure's mere presence is too heavy for the physics around it to accommodate. He picks up the priority channel. His voice carries the flat, absolute authority of a man issuing an order he knows matters. All available assets. Now, he pauses. And somebody get me Stark. In Stark Tower, Friday is already screaming before the call connects. Tony Stark comes off the lab floor mid-stride, the Mark L assembling across his body in fluid motion, not because an alarm triggered it, but because the energy signature bleeding through the building's sensor array is wrong in a way that bypasses his conscious assessment and goes directly to the part of his brain that survived a wormhole. His HUD activates and begins cataloging. Asgardian baseline, negative. Infinity Stone, resonance, negative. Celestial radiation, negative. He has faced beings that rewrote reality. He has cataloged the power output of a fully assembled Infinity Gauntlet. His sensors were specifically rebuilt after the Infinity War to detect existential-level threats before they became existential-level crises. Friday processes for 0.8 seconds, an eternity by her standards, and returns 4 words that Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, and veteran of every impossible scenario the universe has thrown at Earth 6116, was genuinely not prepared to read. No analog on record. He stares at his HUD, looks up at the violet silhouette through the tower glass. Friday, he says quietly. What am I looking at? The silence from his AI, the system that once calculated 17 futures simultaneously, is the most frightening answer he has ever received. This is the moment where you understand that what is descending through that tear is not a weapon, not a warlord, not a cosmic predator driven by hunger or grief or the machinery of conquest. It is something the Marvel Universe has never had to process before, and the processing failure is visible in real time across every system trying to classify it. The being that steps through the breach and descends slowly, deliberately, through 400 feet of Manhattan airspace is not here to consume, not here to rule. The violet aura pull, sing around his massive frame, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of something ancient and purposeful, is not the energy of attack or defense. It is the energy of assessment, of evaluation, of a being that arrived here the same way a judge arrives in a courtroom, already prepared, already certain, already in possession of a verdict that it is simply waiting for the proceedings to formally deliver. His eyes, when they open fully and sweep across the skyline below, carry the cold, sorrowful clarity of someone who has seen exactly what they expected to see and finds no comfort in being right. Think of reality like a hard drive. Thor's lightning can smash the physical casing. Doctor Strange can rewrite the software code, bend the laws, alter the parameters, install new rules mid-execution. The Hulk can pick up the machine and throw it. But what descends through the tear above Manhattan operates at a level beneath all of that, beneath the hardware, beneath the software, at the level of the magnetic field, the thing that, when it passes close enough, doesn't damage the data or corrupt the files. It simply causes the data to stop having ever existed. This is Hakai, not a technique, not a power set, a nature. The nature of a being who was trained from childhood to embody the concept of destruction in service of order, who spent years as the moral center of his universe's most elite justice force, and who, when the moment came and the choice was absolute, chose to shed every scruple and open himself completely to the thing that universes fear most, not evil, judgment without mercy, and he is hovering above a city that has never had to defend itself against that specific threat. Because until 8 minutes ago, it didn't know that threat had a face. If this kind of storytelling hits different, if you want to see what happens when God-tier philosophy from one universe collides with the cosmic hierarchy of another, subscribe right now because this video is going to places that most crossover content is genuinely afraid to go. And before we get there, drop one comment: villain or force of nature? Because that question is going to define everything that follows, and your answer might change completely by the time we reach the end. Now, before the first Quinjet fires its first useless missile, before Thor feels the divine pressure rolling off that violet aura and goes very, very still, before Tony Stark says the 6 words that will summarize the next 45 minutes of this video perfectly. This one's different. This one's real. You need to understand exactly who just stepped through that tear. Because calling Toppo powerful is like calling a supernova bright, technically accurate, completely, catastrophically insufficient. His name is Toppo, former leader of the Pride Troopers of Universe 11. God of Destruction candidate, trained and acknowledged by Vermood himself. A being who stood in the tournament of power, the greatest gathering of fighters across 8 universes, and when pushed past every limit he had built his identity around. When the choice became lose or become the thing you were born to serve, he chose to become it. He shed his justice, his compassion, the code he had carried for his entire life, and what emerged from the other side of that choice hit Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan Vegeta hard enough to leave a mark. Think about that carefully. Sit with what that means. And then look back at the violet figure hovering above Manhattan, his aura expanding slowly outward like a tide that has not yet decided where to stop, and understand that what New York City is currently looking at is not even close to the full measure of what he is capable of. He has not chosen to bring that measure here, yet. But somewhere behind those eyes, behind the god of destruction energy coiling in his chest like a caged event horizon, a verdict is already being written. And the only question that matters, the only question this entire universe needs to answer before that verdict is delivered, is whether Earth 616 can prove it deserves a different sentence. In the Shield Tactical Operations Center, the first coherent data packet arrives 11 minutes after the breach. Not from their own instruments. Those are still cycling through recalibration loops, returning errors where threat classifications should be, blank fields where power readings belong. The data comes from a different source entirely. A residual dimensional transcript pulled from the tear's closing edge by Reed Richards, working from the Baxter building 4 blocks from the perimeter, who had the presence of mind to deploy a dimensional spectrometer before anyone else thought to ask what the breach itself was made of. His report, transmitted directly to Fury's secured channel, is 3 sentences long. The first identifies the breach as an inter-universal transit event, not interdimensional, not temporal, but a crossing between entirely separate continuities of existence. The second confirms that the energy signature predates the known Marvel multiverse by a measurable margin. The third sentence simply reads, "The being that came through is not from anywhere we have a map for." Fury reads it twice, forwards it to Stark without comment. Here is what that map would need to contain. Universe 11. Designation retroactively assigned by Shield within the hour, based on data fragments decoded from the dimensional transcript, is not a soft place. It ranked second in a multiversal tournament that assembled the finest warriors from 8 separate realities, second only to the universe that produced Son Goku and Vegeta. Second. Out of 8. Everything in Universe 11 that has power has earned its power through a civilization that treated justice the way Earth 6116 treats physics. As a fundamental law of existence, non-negotiable, omnipresent, and absolutely without exception. The Pride Troopers are the apex expression of that law made flesh. Imagine Shield, but every agent is Thor tier. Imagine the Avengers, but they report to a god of destruction and answer directly to the king of all existence. Dozens of warriors, each elite beyond any Earth 6116 classification, each bound by an identical code. Protect the innocent, punish the guilty, and never, under any circumstances at any cost, allow the universe to slide toward disorder without answering for it. Toppo led them, not from a command center, not through strategy briefings or tactical delegation. He led from the front, every mission, every engagement, the first body through the door and the last one out. His file, assembled frantically by Shield's newly formed extra-dimensional threat division in the 40 minutes following the breach, reads like a document that a committee of analysts wrote with increasingly unsteady hands. Physical strength, off-scale, speed, untrackable by current instruments, threat classification, unprecedented. And then, in the notes column, a single line added by the analyst who pulled the dimensional transcript data and decoded the tournament of power records embedded within it. 4 words that the analyst typed, deleted, retyped, and ultimately left because nothing else was accurate. He chose to become worse, because that is the truth of Toppo's final evolution. He was already extraordinary, and when the moment demanded, he deliberately made himself into something that extraordinary could not contain. The Tournament of Power is where you understand what is hovering above Manhattan. 8 universes, 80 fighters, a grand arena built at the literal edge of existence under the observation of Zeno, the Omni King, the being above all gods of destruction, above all Kaioshians, above every cosmic hierarchy that Dragon Ball Super ever established. The stakes were absolute. Losing universes were erased entirely, not defeated, erased. In that arena, Toppo held the line for his universe with everything he had, his strength, his code, his certainty. And then Android 17 and Frieza pushed him past the edge of what his code could hold. The choice arrived clean and brutal. Maintain his justice and lose, or shed it completely and become what Vermood had always believed he could be. He shed it. His body expanded, his aura converted from the gold of his heroism to the violent, consuming violet of pure Hakai energy. Vegeta. Super Saiyan. God. Super Saiyan Vegeta, a warrior who had pushed past every biological limit his species possesses, had to break his own body to match the output. That is the version standing above New York City. Not the hero of justice. The candidate who passed the audition. Now here is the question that Chi-LD's extra-dimensional division is frantically trying to answer, and that the Avengers senior staff is debating on a secured channel 3 floors below Fury's operations center, and that Tony Stark, running probability models with one hand while his other hand manages a repulsor charge, is attempting to resolve with actual data before his sensors finish recalibrating. Which version arrived? Because these are not the same thing. The Pride Trooper version. Toppo the hero, the man who gave speeches about justice and posed heroically and believed with every fiber of his being that the moral universe was legible and enforceable. That version is dangerous. The God of Destruction version, the thing he became when he let go of all of that, when he opened completely to Hakai. That version is a different category of problem entirely. The Hakai sphere he demonstrated 3 minutes ago, erasing 40 stories of evacuated real estate without debris, without dust, without any physical residue. That was not a weapon. That was a warning shot from the restrained version. What brought him here is the detail that nobody in the Marvel Universe will fully understand for several hours, and that when they do understand it, will cause Reed Richards to sit down heavily in his lab chair and remain there, very still, for approximately 4 minutes. The breach was not Toppo's doing. It was theirs. Dr. Strange, working on a dimensional stabilization array in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and Reed Richards, running a parallel multiverse membrane calibration experiment in the Baxter Building, unknowingly created a harmonic resonance between Earth 616 and Universe 11. 2 experiments running simultaneously on slightly misaligned frequencies, producing between them a standing wave in the dimensional membrane that operated at exactly the resonant frequency of a universe-to-universe boundary. For 11 seconds, the barrier between Earth 616 and Universe 11 became as structurally sound as wet paper. In Universe 11, Toppo was mid-patrol when the tear opened directly in front of him, pulsing violet and radiating wrongness in every direction. He did not hesitate. A wound in reality is not something you observe, it is something you seal. He stepped through to invest. Tie-gate. The tear sealed behind him. He turned around and found himself looking at a skyline he had never seen, in a universe he had never been told existed, and his diagnostic instincts, trained across decades of law enforcement at a cosmic scale, activated immediately and automatically. Assessment, classification, verdict. What his assessment returned in the first 30 seconds will be the foundation of everything that follows. He accessed. Through the ambient energy field his aura naturally intercepts, the same field that makes his presence legible to cosmic entities and disrupts Earth's electronic infrastructure simultaneously. A raw data stream of Earth 606's history. Not curated, not presented, raw. The complete record of a universe that built its first superhero because a government created a super soldier program and then immediately tried to weaponize it. A universe that produced its most powerful protective force, the Avengers, and then tore them apart over paperwork. The Sokovia Accords. That specific document, that specific political fracture, lodged in Toppo's assessment like a splinter. Because in Universe 11, the Pride Troopers have never once been asked to sign an accord limiting their operational authority. They operate under absolute mandate. The idea that a universe's greatest protectors would divide themselves over governmental oversight is not, to Toppo's framework, a political disagreement. It is a symptom. The most legible symptom he has seen yet of a universe that cannot agree on the most basic question. Who has the right to decide what justice looks like? The violet aura intensifies around his fists, slow and deliberate, the way a doctor's expression changes when a scan confirms what they suspected. Below him, the evacuation perimeter is holding. The Quinjets are repositioning. Somewhere in the city, Thor is lifting into the air with Mjolnir spinning, and the particular expression of a warrior who has felt a divine pressure this heavy before and did not enjoy the experience. Somewhere else, Bruce Banner is losing an argument with himself about the wisdom of engagement, and Tony Stark, finally getting a partial sensor reading back from his recalibrating HUD, is staring at the data with the focused private alarm of a man who has just discovered that the number he was hoping to see, the upper threshold, the ceiling, the number that would tell him this is manageable, does not appear anywhere in the readout. Because the readout has no ceiling. The power signature does not peak, it does not plateau. It simply continues, beyond the range of every instrument he owns, into a register his technology was never built to reach. Friday, Stark says quietly, hovering 300 feet from the most dangerous being ever to enter this universe. What's our play? Friday processes for 0.6 seconds. Then, I don't have one, boss. Toppo turns his head slowly, and his eyes find Iron Man across the gap, the way a judge's eyes find the most interesting piece of evidence in a courtroom. And something in that gaze tells Tony Stark with cold and absolute certainty that whatever is about to happen next was already decided before the first Quinjet fired its first useless missile. The SETI-LD response arrives in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. 3 Quinjet squadrons from separate vectors, 2 helicarrier gunships repositioning from the harbor, mobile containment units sealing a 6-block perimeter with the practiced efficiency of an organization that has absorbed enough apocalyptic scenarios to develop something approaching institutional muscle memory. On the ground, evacuation corridors open with mechanical precision. Emergency broadcasts override night, very civilian channels simultaneously. And in the operations center of helicarrier Iliad, General Thaddeus Ross, who was not supposed to be aboard, who inserted himself into the tactical chain of command 17 minutes ago via a Secretary of State authorization code that Fury is currently and loudly contesting through 3 separate legal channels, leans over the tactical display and speaks the words that will define the next 2 hours of catastrophically bad decision-making. "We treat it as a hostile until proven otherwise," Ross says. "And we hit it with everything we have before it decides to move." Fury, across the room, does not look up from his own display. "With respect, General," he says flatly, "the last time someone fired on an unclassified cosmic entity before attempting communication, we lost a helicarrier." Ross straightens. "Prepare the payload." The Quinjets open fire in coordinated sequence. Not because anyone in the tactical chain genuinely believes the payload will work, but because SHI-LD protocol in an unclassified encounter mandates establishing response capability before dialogue, and because Ross has just made that protocol mandatory via a secretary authorization that Fury's legal team is still frantically unpacking. 12 missiles track clean from 3 separate vectors, their targeting systems locked on the Violet signature with the precision of hardware that has successfully engaged Asgardian warships. They reach Toppo's position. They enter the outer membrane of his aura, and then, without him moving a single muscle, without him raising a hand, shifting his stance, or in any measurable way acknowledging the incoming fire, they stop. Not explode, not deflect. They decelerate from terminal velocity to 0 in approximately 0.3 seconds, suspended in the edge of his aura field like insects caught in amber. They hover there for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for every pilot and every Quinjet to process what they are seeing. And then they dissolve. Not into fire, not into debris. The matter simply redistributes into the surrounding air as ambient particles, the way ice becomes water, but faster and more final. The pilot's instruments register the launches. They never register the impacts. In the operations center, 17 analysts stare at 17 blank confirmation screens. Ross says nothing, for once. Captain America receives the tactical briefing at 30,000 feet, inbound from a mission debrief in Berlin, and his first response is not tactical. It is constitutional. Who authorized Ross to take command of the response chain? His voice on the comm is the particular controlled quiet that his team has learned means the volume is being managed deliberately, that the actual feeling underneath it is significantly louder. Maria Hill's response is careful. Secretary Authorization Cap, it's technically legal under the Sokovia Accords paragraph 17. Unclassified cosmic threats default to military command structure when SHI-LD classification is incomplete. Rogers absorbs this for a moment. Outside the Quinjet window, the Manhattan skyline is visible in the distance, the violet signature above it pulsing against the morning sky like a second, wrongly colored sun. "So we fired on an unidentified being," he says slowly, "before attempting communication, because a document we signed after Sokovia told us to." Hill doesn't answer. The silence is its own answer. Rogers looks at the signature again. "Pull Ross off the command chain, right now." Another silence. I'm working on it, Cap. Work faster. Thor feels it at the exact moment the missiles dissolve, not the dissolution itself, the quality of what dissolved them. He is ascending through the atmosphere at full Asgardian velocity when the sensation hits him, and it is specific enough that it stops him mid-flight, hovering in place, one hand pressed to his chest with the involuntary instinct of someone checking that their heart is still operating correctly. It is not pain. It is recognition. The deep precognitive recognition of a being that has spent 1,000 years in the presence of divine forces and has developed, through that exposure, an almost biological sensitivity to the particular resonance of power that originates from outside normal cosmic hierarchy. What he felt when Thanos assembled the gauntlet was massive but comprehensible. The concentration of universal forces into a single focal point. What he is feeling from the violet figure above Manhattan is different in kind, not degree. It does not feel like concentrated universal force. It feels like something that arrived from outside the universe entirely, carrying the atmospheric pressure of a different reality's fundamental laws still clinging to it. He increases his ascent speed. "Someone tell Ross to stand down," he says into the comm. "Missiles will not be relevant to this conversation." Tony Stark reaches the confrontation altitude simultaneously, and the two of them, the god of thunder and the genius in the flying suit, take position flanking the violet figure at a distance that is tactically defensible and psychologically optimistic. Toppo does not react to their arrival. He does not track them with his eyes, does not shift his stance, does not in any measurable way register the approach of two of Earth 616's most powerful defenders. He continues his slow survey of the city below, with the unhurried attention of an inspector who arrived to do a job and intends to finish it regardless of what the building's current occupants think about the visit. Tony's HUD is cycling through assessment protocols at maximum speed. Friday, pulling every available reference against the partial sensor data, and what keeps coming back is the same result that has been coming back since the breach. No analog. He switches to a different approach. Friday, stop trying to classify. Just give me physics. Raw environmental data. What is this thing doing to the space around it? A pause. Gravitational distortion at 0.47 standard deviations above baseline. Electromagnetic suppression radius, consistent at 6.2 miles. Spatial compression at subject's immediate vicinity, measurable. Tony stares. Spatial compression? Like it's too heavy, Friday says carefully, for this universe's physics to comfortably accommodate. Steve Rogers lands at the perimeter command post just as Thor makes first verbal contact above, and he moves immediately and directly to the tactical display where Ross is still attempting to authorize a secondary payload strike. Rogers places one hand flat on the authorization panel. His voice is quiet. "General." Ross turns, and his expression carries the particular irritation of a man who expected this confrontation and prepared arguments for it. "Captain, the Sokovia Accords clearly establish..." "The Sokovia Accords," Rogers says, "establish rules of engagement for known threats, classified entities, beings we have enough information about to make an informed decision." He holds Ross's gaze steadily. "We have been observing this entity for 9 minutes. We fired on it before we spoke to it. Our missiles dissolved on contact, and your response to that data is to fire again." He removes his hand from the panel. "I'm not stopping you legally, General. I'm telling you operationally that if you fire a second payload, you will not be demonstrating strength. You will be demonstrating that we cannot learn fullness or I'm a mistake we made 400 seconds ago." Ross stares at him for a long moment. Then, with the controlled fury of a man choosing his battles, he steps back from the panel. Rogers turns back to the display. "Open a comm channel to the entity. All frequencies." Thor speaks first, because Thor has always been better at this particular moment than he gets credit for. The moment before a fight becomes inevitable, when the right words delivered with the right authority can create a pause that nothing else can. He descends to within 50 feet of Toppo's position, Mjolnir held loose, his posture carrying the particular combination of readiness and openness that 1,000 years of both combat and diplomacy have built into his muscle memory. "I am Thor Odinson," he says, and the full weight of Asgard is in every syllable. Bloodlines, divine mandate, the authority of a civilization that has been steward to 9 realms for longer than most of Earth's civilizations have existed. "Son of Odin," Prince of Asgard, speak your purpose here and know that you address a universe that will defend itself. Toppo's eyes move to him slowly. Something passes across his face. Not recognition exactly, but the particular quality of attention that a very experienced evaluator gives to the first genuinely interesting piece of evidence in a case. He studies Thor the way Thor studied him, with complete focus, total patience, and the calm of someone who has already decided that whatever happens next will not surprise them. Thor Odinson. Toppo's voice, when it finally arrives, is not loud. It does not need to be. It carries the way a judge's voice carries in a silent courtroom, not through volume, but through the absolute, bone-deep certainty that every word being spoken exists at a register slightly above the frequency of ordinary speech, in the range where authority lives. Son of a king, warrior of some considerable ability. His eyes move from Thor to Iron Man to the perimeter below, taking in the assembled response, the Quinjets, the helicarriers, the ground units, the political machinery of a civilization mobilizing every instrument it has to address something it cannot classify. Something in his expression shifts. Not contempt, not pity. Something more precise. The expression of a diagnostician looking at a patient's chart and finding exactly the symptom pattern they were expecting. You fired weapons at me, he says, before you asked my name. A pause. The violet aura pulses once, slowly. In my universe, that is not the behavior of a civilization that trusts its own justice. His eyes return to Thor. It is the behavior of a civilization that is afraid of it. The words land in the silence like a verdict already rendered. Below, in the perimeter command post, Rogers hears them through the comm feed. He does not respond immediately. He stands very still for a moment, because the thing he will not say out loud, the thing that sits in his chest with uncomfortable weight, is that the being hovering 400 feet above Manhattan is not entirely wrong. Thor moves first. That decision will be dissected in every after-action report, every congressional hearing, every closed-door Avengers debrief for months afterward. And the conclusion every analysis reaches is the same uncomfortable truth. It was the right call, made for the wrong reason, not strategy, not protocol, pride. Because Toppo just told the God of Thunder, to his face, in front of every instrument's high-yelled, has pointed at this confrontation, that his civilization is afraid of its own justice. And 1,000 years of Asgardian bloodline does not absorb that kind of statement without a physical response. Mjolnir leaves his hand carrying the full rotational charge of a weapon that has cracked frost giant fortresses, trailing a lightning discharge that ionizes the air along its entire flight path, turning the gap between Thor and Toppo into a corridor of white-hot plasma that is visible from the evacuation perimeter 4 blocks below as a blinding horizontal column of light. The weapon crosses 40 feet of Manhattan airspace in less than a second. It strikes Toppo directly, centrally, in the chest. The thunderclap that follows shatters every remaining window in a 6-block radius. Car alarms ignite across 14 city blocks simultaneously, and Toppo moves backward exactly 3 inches. 3 inches. The measurement will appear in Tony Stark's impact analysis report later that afternoon, precise to 4 decimal places. And every person who reads it will stop at that number and remain stopped for a moment. 3 inches of displacement from a strike that Thor has used to level mountains. The aftermath plays out in the specific, terrible silence that follows a moment when reality updates everyone's assumptions simultaneously. Mjolnir completing its return arc, the lightning cascade detonating across Toppo's frame in a brilliant discharge that would stop a Leviathan's cardiovascular system cold, the smoke clearing across his chest, and the aura beneath it completely, utterly unchanged. Not diminished, not redirected. It absorbed the full divine output of an Asgardian god, the way a river absorbs a stone. Toppo looks down at the impact point with the calm, slightly interested expression of a structural engineer examining a stress test result that confirmed what the blueprints already predicted. Then his eyes return to Thor. "Your strength," he says with the flat honesty of a being constitutionally incapable of flattery, "is genuine. He rolls his right shoulder once. But you are fighting with the tools of this universe, against something that arrived from outside it. He closes the distance in a fraction of a second. A being of his mass moving at a speed that the human brain refuses to process correctly, registering it as a discontinuity rather than motion, as if he was simply there and then simply here without the intervening travel. His fist connects with Thor's guard with force sufficient to produce a shockwave that radiates outward in a perfect sphere. Concrete on the rooftops below buckling upward, Child vehicles at the perimeter flipping onto their sides from the pressure differential alone, a Quinjet catching the outer edge of the wave and spinning 40 degrees off its flight path before the pilot recovers. Thor himself travels 11 miles before Mjolnir's return arc catches his momentum, and when his comm reconnects, he is breathing with the deliberate, controlled rhythm of a warrior managing an injury he will not report. He recalibrates mid-air with the trained precision of someone who has taken worse and returned, angles back toward the confrontation, and calls the storm. Real storm, full Asgardian fury, the sky above Manhattan going black and violent as the cloud cover responds to their king. "This," Thor says into the comm, his voice carrying a quality his team has never heard in it before, "is not a standard engagement. Do not treat it as one." Carol Danvers hits the battlefield at full binary before the sentence finishes transmitting, a streak of gold-white fire entering the confrontation zone from high orbit at a velocity that paints a visible trail across the upper atmosphere, registering on weather satellites as an anomalous thermal event. Binary Carol is not a combatant in any conventional sense of the word. She is a strategic event, a human being channeling the energy output of a white hole, capable of trading sustained blows with beings who reshape stellar geography as a hobby. She reads the tactical situation in 0.2 seconds and makes the decision that her power set suggests. Not a strike, not a beam, an absorption clinch. Both arms wrap around Toppo from behind, her binary field activating at full capacity, designed to drain his energy directly into her own reserves the same way she has drained Kree battle cruisers, energy-based cosmic entities, beings operating at the outer edge of what Earth 616 classifies as finite power. For 0.4 seconds, 0.4 of a second that will be replayed in the tactical debrief more times than any other segment of the engagement, it appears to be working. The Hakai aura dims across his shoulders. Her reserves spike upward. Her eyes go wide with the specific shock of someone whose gamble just paid off. It's working. Then the aura comes back. And it comes back different. What happens to Carol in the next 3 seconds is the most important data point the engagement produces. More important than Thor's displacement measurement. More important than the Quinjet instruments. More important than anything Tony's HUD captures. Because it answers the question that every scientist, every sorcerer, and every cosmic entity in this universe has been asking since the breach opened. Can Hakai be absorbed, redirected, or contained by a force native to Earth 616? The answer arrives not as an explosion or a feedback surge, but as something quieter and more absolute. The Hakai energy Carol drew into her binary field does not metabolize. It does not convert into white hole power the way every other form of cosmic energy does. It sits inside her reserves like a foreign object that reality has flagged for removal. And then quietly, with no drama and no warning, it begins dissolving its own presence from the inside out, not harming her, not attacking her, simply refusing to exist within a system it was never designed to inhabit. Carol releases the clinch instinctively, dropping back 30 meters, her binary power fluctuating in wild, irregular pulses for 3 terrifying seconds before stabilizing. She is uninjured, but she is also, for the first time in her career, afraid of what she just touched. "It doesn't absorb," she reports into the comm, her voice stripped of everything except the fact. "It unexists itself from inside you. Do not let it make contact." In the perimeter command post, General Ross is watching the binary fluctuation data on the tactical display with an expression that his staff has learned to read accurately. Not alarm, not strategic concern, but the particular focused calculation of a man watching a powerful asset demonstrate a vulnerability and immediately beginning to assess how that vulnerability can be useful. He opens a private channel to his aide. Get me the Weapon X division, and pull whatever we have on extra-dimensional power siphoning. Anything from the Phoenix Force protocols, the Sentry containment files, the Beyonder incident. His aide hesitates. General, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Ross says quietly, watching Carol stabilize on the display, that a being this powerful, with a power set this absolute, is either the greatest threat this planet has ever faced or the greatest asset it has ever been offered. And I intend to determine which before Fury or Rogers or that Asgardian with the hammer decides to make that determination for me. He closes the channel. On the display, the Hulk's biosignature enters the tracking radius. Ross watches it for a moment, then almost to himself. Let the green one soften him up first. The Hulk does not enter the battlefield. He arrives in it, the distinction being that entering implies a transition from outside to inside, and by the time the Hulk is relevant to any situation, the outside-inside boundary has all removed. Eddie ceased to have structural integrity. He comes from below, a ground launch off the collapsing upper deck of a parking structure that his landing already destroyed, both fists driven upward with the combined force of every grievance Banner's body has ever metabolized into rage, which is a number that increases measurably with every second of this engagement. The impact is real. The shockwave radiates outward in a perfect sphere, cracking asphalt across 3 surrounding blocks, toppling a traffic camera array, sending 2 SHIELD ground units sliding backward on their chassis from the pressure differential. Toppo travels upward, 20 feet, 40, 60, 80, and the evacuation crowds watching from behind the perimeter barriers make a sound that is part hope and part animal terror, the involuntary vocalization of people who have just witnessed their universe's strongest purely physical force achieve something that divine lightning could not. Then Toppo stops ascending, looks down, and descends back to his prior altitude with the unhurried calm of a being that just experienced something it found mildly interesting. He raises his right hand. The Hawkeye energy gathers in his palm, not as a reflex, not as retaliation, but with the deliberate pedagogical slowness of a demonstration being constructed for an audience. He is making a point. He is showing them the gap between what they have done to him and what he has chosen not to do in return. The violet sphere builds to full charge. Then he releases it. Not at Thor, not at Carol, not at the Hulk. At a building. An already evacuated office tower on the eastern edge of the perimeter, chosen with the cold, precise logic of a being that understands the difference between punishment and illustration. The sphere makes contact. There is no explosion, no collapse sequence, no dramatic structural failure. The building occupies its footprint for 1 complete second after contact. And then it does not. 40 stories of steel, glass, and reinforced concrete simply stop existing. The adjacent structures standing on either side of a gap so clean it looks architectural, as though the building was always absent and the city simply forgot to update its skyline. The silence that follows is so complete that the evacuation crowds 3 blocks away can hear each other breathing. Toppo lowers his hand. His voice carries through the silence without effort, the way a statement of fact carries when everyone present already knows it is true. I have not come to fight, he says. I have come to judge, and I have not yet decided what this universe deserves. Above the perimeter, Ross stares at the gap in the skyline, pulls up the Weapon X files, and begins to read. The footage reaches every screen on the planet in 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Not Shield footage. Shield has been attempting a media suppression order for the past 4 minutes and achieving precisely nothing, because suppression orders require cooperative infrastructure, and the infrastructure of 2026's content ecosystem does not cooperate with anything. The footage comes from 47 separate civilian sources simultaneously. Phone cameras, rooftop security arrays, a live-streaming drone that its operator refused to recall despite 3 separate official warnings, and 1 spectacularly committed freelance journalist who positioned herself on a fire escape 2 blocks from the perimeter before the cordon fully closed and has been transmitting uninterrupted for 9 minutes to an audience that is currently doubling in size every 40 seconds. What that audience watches is not a battle. Not exactly. Hat They Watch is 40 stories of Manhattan real estate ceasing to exist without fire, without collapse, without any of the physical vocabulary that human civilization has spent centuries developing to process large-scale destruction. The building is there, then it is not. And the comment sections, across every platform, in 43 languages simultaneously, do something that no content analyst in the history of digital media has ever recorded at scale. They go silent for 11 seconds, then they explode. What follows across global social media is not the coordinated panic that emergency management planners have spent decades modeling. It is something simultaneously more chaotic and more human than their models anticipated. The internet processing a genuine existential event in real time, which means processing it in every direction simultaneously with no central narrative authority and no functional filter between raw terror and public broadcast. Toppo judges Earth reaches trending globally in 4 minutes. Send him back peaks and crashes within 6. A contingent of accounts, significant enough in number to constitute a measurable demographic, begins circulating footage of the Hakai demonstration not with horror captions but with reverence ones, framing the erasure as divine intervention. The comments below cycling through eschatological frameworks from a dozen different traditions, finding different words for the same overwhelming concept. This is what we always knew was coming. A counter-movement hashtag, #EarthStandsUp, accumulates 40 million impressions in 8 minutes, anchored almost entirely to a single piece of footage. The Hulk's ground launch strike, the moment Toppo moved upward, the crowd's involuntary roar, looped and rescored with orchestral music by a fan editor in Sao Paulo who uploads it 17 minutes after the engagement, and watch as it accumulate 3 million views before he finishes his coffee. Hope and terror, it turns out, are content categories with nearly identical engagement metrics. In Washington, the emergency session convenes before the first trending hashtag peaks. The Joint Chiefs want a nuclear authorization, a position that carries approximately the tactical relevance of a strongly worded letter, given that Shi-LD's entire conventional arsenal just demonstrated the effectiveness of ambient dissolution, but which has the considerable political advantage of being decisive, which in a crisis room is worth more than accuracy. The president's senior advisor is simultaneously managing calls from 7 separate foreign governments, 4 of which have independently moved assets to launch readiness in the past 11 minutes. Not to strike Manhattan, but to strike whatever moves next, wherever it moves next, with the grim institutional logic of militaries that have decided the only remaining question is reaction time. The 8th call is from the UN Secretary General, who is attempting to organize a joint statement of non-aggression toward the entity above Manhattan, operating on the theory that if it is genuinely a judge rather than an invader, a formal acknowledgement of its authority might constitute a relevant legal argument. The president's advisor listens to this proposal for 12 seconds, then moves to the next call. Some theories are too sophisticated for their moment. 3 blocks from the perimeter, in the basement level of a parking structure that the evacuation cordon missed, a man sits on a motorcycle and does not move. He has been sitting there since the breach opened, his hands loose on the handlebars, his posture carrying the stillness of someone who is not afraid, because fear requires uncertainty, and he is not uncertain about anything happening above him. Johnny Blaze, the Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance, the living contract between human mortality and divine retribution, sits in the dark and feels the Hakai energy moving through the city's infrastructure the way a tuning fork feels a compatible frequency, as recognition. The penance stare works on guilt, on the accumulated weight of harm done with awareness, every wound inflicted, every injustice enacted, every choice made in full knowledge of its consequence. He has used it on monsters, on murderers, on beings so ancient their guilt has geological depth. He reaches toward Toppo's energy with the spirit of vengeance's perception, the supernatural equivalent of looking someone directly in the soul, and finds something that stops him completely. Not the absence of guilt, something stranger. The complete, absolute, terrifying conviction of a being that has never once doubted that what it was doing was right. The penance stare, Johnny understands slowly, requires a target who believes they might be wrong. He sits in the dark for a long time. The motorcycle engine ticks as it cools. Even the spirit of vengeance, he says to no one, his voice barely above a whisper, doesn't have a play here. Dr. Strange reaches the Sanctum Sanctorum at the same moment the first civilian casualty report transmits across the Avengers' secure channel. A family of 4, basement shelter, 3 blocks inside the perimeter, caught in the structural collapse triggered by the shockwave of Thor's initial exchange before the engagement fully escalated. Not a Hakai casualty, not a deliberate strike, ambient consequence. The term will appear in his notes later, underlined twice, because it is the most accurate description of what makes Toppo categorically different from every threat this universe has previously processed. He does not need to aim to cause damage. His presence alone, the gravitational and electromagnetic distortion of his aura at reduced power, is sufficient to compromise the structural integrity of human construction within its radius. Strange pulls every relevant text from the archive simultaneously, not reading sequentially but processing the way his sorcerer's training allows, absorbing multiple sources in parallel, cross-referencing as he goes. What the texts return, across every tradition, every dimension, every historical record his archive contains, is a consistent description of something adjacent to what he is looking at. Not identical, adjacent. The closest analog in Marvel's entire magical scholarship to Hakai energy is not a spell, not a cosmic force, not an Infinity Stone interaction. It is the theoretical description of what happens to matter at the boundary of the living tribunal's judgment when the verdict is absolute removal. Strange closes the text, reopens it, reads the line again, then reaches for the cloak with the deliberate calm of a man who has just discovered that the problem in front of him has no historical precedent and is choosing consciously not to let that information change his approach. On the battlefield, the Avengers have settled into a holding pattern that nobody is comfortable describing as stable, because stable implies a situation with predictable parameters, and the situation above Manhattan has not had predictable parameters since the first Quinjet missile dissolved on contact. Thor maintains closest position, close enough to re-engage immediately, far enough to avoid triggering escalation through proximity. Carol circles the outer radius in standard binary, reserves conserved after the absorption failure, her tactical assessment cycling through engagement options and consistently returning the same result, insufficient data for confident recommendation. The Hulk has been persuaded, through a sustained comm conversation that involved Banner's voice gradually reasserting itself through the green exterior, to hold position on a rooftop at the perimeter ES. Deej, rather than attempting a second physical engagement that the first one's data suggests would produce identical results at greater cost. And Tony Stark hovers at medium distance, running every passive scan his suit can perform without emitting a detectable active signal, building the most comprehensive extra-dimensional power profile ever assembled in real time, and finding that the more data he accumulates, the less confident his threat models become. The problem, he says quietly to Friday, is that every model I build assumes a ceiling, a maximum output, a point where the physics say this is as much as this system can produce. He watches the violet aura pulse. I'm not finding a ceiling. Friday's response is careful. Because there isn't one visible at current output levels, boss. Tony is quiet for a moment. What's his current output level? Another careful pause. Approximately 12% of what the breach event registered during transit. Below all of it, in the gap where the building used to stand. That clean, architectural absence, that 40-story silence in the middle of a city that has never been quiet. Something is happening that none of the instruments are measuring, because none of the instruments are pointed at it. Toppo is looking at it, not performing observation, not making a tactical assessment, looking with the specific quality of attention that a being gives to the first consequence of its own actions that it did not fully calculate in advance. He knew the demonstration was necessary. He knew a universe that fired weapons before asking names needed to be shown the distance between its capability and his, needed to understand viscerally and immediately that the gap between what it could do and what he was choosing not to do was not a gap it could close with better ammunition or smarter tactics. He knew all of that. The calculation was correct. The execution was precise. And yet, the absence where the building stood is not an abstraction. It is a shape. a specific 40-story tall, block-wide shape of nothingness in the middle of a city full of people who built that building, worked in it, passed it on their way to other things, absorbed it into their unconscious geography the way cities absorb all their structures, not noticing them until they are gone, and then noticing the goneness every single day. Toppo looks at the shape of what he erased and feels, for the first time since crossing the breach, something that his doctrine has never had a category for. Not guilt. Guilt requires believing you were wrong. Something more complicated than guilt. The particular weight of being entirely right and finding that rightness does not make the consequence smaller. The civilian casualty report reaches him simultaneously with the Avengers channel. His energy field intercepts encrypted transmissions the way a satellite dish intercepts broadcast signals, passively and completely, as an unavoidable consequence of operating at his power level in a universe whose technology he outscales by several orders of magnitude. 4 people. Basement shelter. Structural collapse from ambient shockwave. He reads the data with the same focused attention he gives everything, and the calculation is straightforward. The deaths are attributable to the engagement initiated by Thor in response to a statement Toppo made, meaning the causal chain runs from his words through Thor's pride, through the shockwave, through the structural failure to 4 people who were trying to stay safe in a basement. The chain is clear. The question his doctrine provides is equally clear. Are these deaths the consequence of his judgment, or of the universe's inability to protect its own people from the consequences of its own defenders' choices? In Universe 11, the answer to that question would resolve cleanly along established precedent. Here, hovering, above a city that feels neither clean nor precedented, the question sits in his chest and does not resolve. His aura pulses, slower than before, heavier, with the rhythm of something enormous engaged in a process it was not architecturally designed for, something that, in a different context, in a simpler universe, might almost be recognized as doubt. Below the perimeter, Ross finishes reading the Weapon X file, closes it, and begins drafting an authorization request that will, if approved, change the nature of this engagement entirely. Dr. Strange arrives the way he always arrives, through a portal that opens at the precise coordinates the situation requires, at the precise moment the situation requires them, with the practiced economy of a man who has navigated the space between seconds long enough to treat temporal precision as a baseline professional standard rather than an achievement. He steps through into Manhattan airspace above the confrontation line, the cloak of levitation spreading behind him, the eye of Agamotto cold against his chest, and he takes 3 full seconds to simply look, not with the tactical assessment of a combatant entering a battlefield, but with the diagnostic attention of a sorcerer supreme examining a metaphysical anomaly that his archive just classified as the closest thing to living tribunal boundary energy ever recorded outside a theoretical framework. Those 3 seconds produce more actionable intelligence than Shai-LD's 9 minutes of instrument data. The violet aura is not radiating outward from Toppo the way power radiates from conventional sources. It is radiating inward, pulling the surrounding fabric of local reality toward its center with the quiet, absolute authority of something that exists at a deeper layer of existence than the reality it is currently occupying. Strange has one word for what he is seeing. H. He does not say it aloud. He files it, presses it flat under the weight of professional composure, and opens his comm. Hold all engagement. I'm going in. He advances alone, hands open, the universal signal of I am here to speak before I am here to act. Toppo watches his approach with the evaluating stillness he has given every new element of this engagement. Cataloging, assessing, cross-referencing against a framework of cosmic hierarchy that is comprehensive for Universe 11 and almost entirely inapplicable to what he is looking at here. But something in the quality of Strange's advance registers differently than Thor's divine challenge, or Tony's technological scan, or the Hulk's kinetic arrival. Strange moves like someone who has stood in front of things larger than himself so many times that the scale of a threat has stopped being the primary variable in his threat assessment. He moves, Toppo recognizes with a precision that surprises him, like a pride trooper, not in power, in commitment. The recognition produces a fractional adjustment in his posture, infinitesimal, invisible to human instruments, visible to Strange's sorcerer's perception as clearly as a door opening a crack. Strange files that too, steps closer. "You made a diagnosis," he says without preamble. "I'd like to present a second opinion." Toppo's response is not hostile. That is the detail that will surprise every analyst who reviews the engagement footage later, because the preceding 40 minutes of this confrontation have established a pattern of absolute non-negotiating certainty from the figure at its center. But he listens. He listens with the complete, focused attention of a being that has spent its entire existence making judgments and has, built into that process by the discipline of genuine justice, rather than the performance of it, a structural requirement to hear evidence before finalizing verdicts. "Your universe," he says slowly, "has destroyed itself and rebuilt how many times?" Strange does not hesitate. "Several. And each time," Toppo continues, the words carrying the quiet weight of a prosecutor who has already reviewed the discovery documents, "you rebuilt it with the same architecture, the same fractures, the same institutions making the same errors with slightly different personnel." He tilts his head. "That is not resilience, sorcerer. That is a civilization that has mistaken survival for progress." Strange holds his gaze. "Or," he says carefully, "it is a civilization that keeps surviving tests that were designed to end it, and finds new reasons to continue with every iteration." The air between them carries the specific charge of two frameworks meeting at their outermost edges, neither collapsing, both pressing. Strange opens the assault without further negotiation, because he is many things, but he is not someone who concedes a debate and then stands in the blast radius of the consequences. The bands of Sitorak erupt from his hands, geometric, crystalline constructs of pure dimensional authority, burning crimson against the gray Manhattan sky, mandala complex in their architecture, each interlocking ring reinforced with the full weight of one of the most powerful extra-dimensional entities in Marvel's magical hierarchy. They are not chains in any simple sense. They are arguments made physical, dimensional legislation, the universe's own structural law wrapped around a target and commanded to hold. They reach Toppo. They wrap. The crimson geometry blazes against the violet aura like two competing light sources fighting for the same space. For one genuine, breathtaking second, the analysts will frame this specific moment in every subsequent briefing. The bands hold. Strange presses his advantage immediately, layering a secondary containment structure over the first, adding the 7 rings of Ragador as reinforcing architecture, his hands moving with the precise speed of someone who has learned that the window between working and no longer working is measured in fractions. The combined structure blazes against the sky, beautiful, complex, absolutely correct by every principle of magical engineering Strange has mastered across decades of practice. Then the Hakai aura pulses once, and the constructs lose their color. That is the only way to describe it accurately. They do not shatter, do not dispel, do not unravel in the conventional magical sense that Strange has trained himself to diagnose and counter. They simply lose their color, the crimson draining from them the way color drains from a painting left in direct sunlight for too long, the geometric complexity of the mandala structures remaining visible for approximately 1.2 seconds as gray outlines, empty frameworks, architecture without content, and then those outlines dissolve too, leaving nothing. Not residual energy, not a magical footprint. Strange's sorcerous perception reaches instinctively for the trace signature that every dispelled spell leaves in the fabric of local reality, the equivalent of a footprint in dust, always present, always readable, the baseline evidence that something was here and is now gone. There is no footprint, no dust. The dimensional substrate where his most powerful constructs existed 1.4 seconds ago has been updated to reflect that they were never there. Strange lowers his hand slowly, stares at the space where the bands of Sitorak were, and experiences, for the first time in his career as Sorcerer Supreme, the specific cognitive vertigo of a man whose professional framework has just been informed that it is operating at the wrong layer of reality. He tries 3 more approaches in the rapid, escalating sequence of a diagnostician who needs to map the full boundary of a problem before accepting its dimensions. The mirror dimension. That fractal prison of infinite recursive geometry that has contained Dormammu-level threats, erupts around Toppo It, in a cascade of kaleidoscopic architecture, refracting the violet aura back on itself from 17 simultaneous angles. Toppo raises one hand. The mirror dimension loses its color. The Eye of Agamotto next. Time dilation field deployed at full capacity. The amber light of the time stone's residual energy in the eye's housing activating a localized temporal loop designed to trap a target in a repeating moment of Strange's choosing. The loop initiates, runs for 0.3 seconds. Then the Hawkeye aura reaches the temporal construct's foundational layer, and the loop simply, quietly, without drama, with the absolute finality of a sentence being deleted rather than completed, stops having been started. Strange stands in the aftermath of 3 consecutive failures, his hands at his sides, his composure intact through the sheer professional discipline of a man who has decided that losing his composure would cost him information he still needs and processes what the data is telling him. His magic operates at the level of reality's structure. Hawkeye operates at the level where structure is written. He has been trying to stop a fire by rearranging the furniture in the burning building. "Your constructs are extraordinary," Toppo says, and there is no mockery in it, just the flat, honest acknowledgement of a being constitutionally committed to accurate assessment. "The sophistication of your reality manipulation exceeds anything I have encountered in an individual practitioner." He steps forward once, and Strange holds his ground through what is visibly a conscious act of will. "But you are working with the tools your universe provided you. You are manipulating the paint." His voice drops to something that carries more weight at lower volume, the way deep structures carry more load than surface ones. "I arrived carrying the authority of the being above your universe's author. I do not interact with the paint, sorcerer." He holds Strange's gaze with the absolute sorrowful certainty of someone delivering a diagnosis they wish were different. "I interact with the canvas, and no arrangement of paint, however masterful, can instruct the canvas to resist the hand that holds it." Strange is silent for a full 4 seconds. His eyes do not move from Toppo's, and in those 4 seconds, the Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, 6-1 sees, the man who has stared down Dormammu, who stood against Thanos with the full weight of the Infinity Stones in play, who has navigated the most complex magical architecture in 14 dimensions, performs the most difficult cognitive operation his training has ever required. He accepts that the framework is insufficient. Not temporarily, structurally, and begins with the desperate focused speed of someone who has no good options and intends to find one anyway, building an entirely new one. He opens the comm channel with the flat, stripped voice of a man transmitting facts because facts are all that remain. "Thor, the Asgardian Observatory Network. I need access to their cosmic early warning system, whatever they have pointed at the outer hierarchies." A pause. "Strange, what are you looking for?" Thor's voice is careful. "The living tribunal's boundary markers, the outermost edge of the cosmic judgment architecture for this universe." Another pause, longer. "You think?" "I think," Strange says quietly, watching Toppo's aura pulse in that slow, deliberate rhythm above him, "that what we are dealing with operates at a tier that our universe has only one response mechanism for. And that response mechanism has never been triggered in recorded history because nothing has ever arrived here that required it." He closes the channel. Below the confrontation line, in the perimeter command post, Ross has finished drafting the Weapon X authorization and is transmitting it through a back channel to a facility in Nevada that does not appear in any SHIELD database because it was built specifically to not appear in any SHIELD database. The transmission confirms receipt in 11 seconds. Ross reads the confirmation, looks up at the violet figure above the city, and for the first time since the breach opened, allows himself something that, on a different face, might be called a smile. Because the Sorcerer Supreme just told the Avengers that their universe has no conventional answer to the being above Manhattan, and Ross has spent 30 years building answers that conventional people would never think to use. The Silver Surfer feels the disturbance before Strange's message reaches him, before the Asgardian Observatory Network transmits its alert, before any instrument in any monitoring system in the solar system formally registers what has happened above Manhattan as a cosmic event rather than a localized threat. He feels it the way he feels everything, not through senses that operate on the narrow human spectrum of sight and sound and proximity, but through the power cosmic itself. That vast and ancient awareness that flows through him the way blood flows through living tissue, connecting him to every tremor in the universal fabric simultaneously and without delay. He is between Saturn and Jupiter when it begins, a ripple in the cosmic substrate that his awareness classifies, automatically and with the precision of a being that has spent centuries reading the universe's vital signs as something he has no existing category for. Not a threat signature, not a dimensional anomaly, not an energy event of any known type. Something that his power cosmic reaches toward and then pulls back from slightly, the way a hand pulls back from a surface that is too cold. Not painful, not dangerous, but wrong, at a temperature that has no business existing in this universe's physics. He turns the board, accelerates, and feels, as the distance collapses between himself and the source, the specific resonance of power that does not belong to Earth. 1/6, pressing its full weight against the inside of reality from a position it was never meant to occupy. He enters the atmosphere at a velocity that paints a silver line across the stratosphere visible from the ground as a brief, clean streak. The evacuation crowds pointing upward with the involuntary recognition of people who have developed, across years of impossible events, something approaching a vocabulary for cosmic arrivals. The Silver Surfer is one of the few entities in this universe that humanity has built a genuine, complicated relationship with. He has saved this world. He has marked it for consumption. He has mourned for it from the cold distance of space and chosen it more than once over the vast, indifferent freedom of the stars. When he descends toward Manhattan and the violet figure at its center, he carries that history in his posture, the weight of a being that has stood at the intersection of power and conscience for long enough that the intersection has become his permanent address. He reads Toppo's energy signature on approach, and the power cosmic returns a result that makes him reduce speed incrementally, not from hesitation, but from the need to be precise about what he is perceiving. Because what the power cosmic is detecting beneath the surface of Toppo's aura is not simply a foreign power signature. It is the sensation of a universe's fundamental laws encountering something that exists below the layer where those laws are enforced, like a legal system making contact with a jurisdiction it has no authority over. "You carry destruction's mandate," the Surfer says, taking position across from Toppo with the gravity of a being that has delivered important statements to entities far beyond human scale and understands that delivery matters as much as content, not as an acquired ability, as a nature. Toppo's eyes move to him, and the shift in his attention is immediately legible to every instrument and every enhanced perception currently pointed at this confrontation, because it is qualitatively different from the attention he has given every other participant. Thor received the attention of a combatant being assessed. Strange received the attention of an intellect being measured. The Silver Surfer receives something else, the attention of a being that has just encountered for the first time in this universe something that speaks its language, not the language of power, the language of burden. The recognition moves across Toppo's face in a way that the analysts reviewing the footage will argue about for months, because it is the first expression he has displayed that does not map cleanly onto any category in their behavioral assessment frameworks. It is not warmth, not alliance. It is the specific, exhausted recognition of someone who has carried an immense weight alone for a very long time, and has just seen that weight reflected accurately in another being's eyes. "You understand what I am," Toppo says. It is not a question. "I understand what you carry," the Surfer replies, with the careful precision of a being that has learned that accuracy matters more than comfort in high-stakes conversations. The difference between those two statements is the entire substance of what I want to discuss. He positions the board in a slow, deliberate arc that keeps him within Toppo's direct sightline, not confrontational, not evasive, the specific geometry of a conversation partner who intends to be heard. I carried Galactus's mandate for decades, the authority to mark worlds for consumption, the absolute cosmic scale certainty that what I was doing served a purpose larger than the individual tragedies it produced. He pauses, and the pause carries the full weight of what it cost him to stop carrying that mandate. I was not wrong about the purpose. I was wrong about whether the purpose made the certainty safe to maintain indefinitely. Toppo absorbs this without response, and the absorption itself is significant, because a being operating on pure doctrinal certainty does not absorb, it deflects. The fact that this lands means something is already moving inside the framework. Strange, watching from his position at the confrontation perimeter, files the observation immediately, presses the comm. Thor, now, Asgardian cosmic observers, whatever they have. What follows is not a fight. In a video that has contained Thor's lightning, Carol's binary field, the Hulk's kinetic assault, and 3 consecutive failures of the most sophisticated magical constructs in Earth 600's history, what happens next is simultaneously the most consequential and the most visually understated sequence of the entire engagement. 2 beings hover in the gray Manhattan sky and talk. The surfer speaks of Marvel's cosmic architecture, the Celestials as civilization-level judges who operate on timescales that make individual lives statistically irrelevant, but whose judgments have consistently favored continuation over erasure when continuation remained possible. He speaks of eternity, the living embodiment of the Marvel universe itself, a being so fundamental that fighting it is the philosophical equivalent of fighting the concept of duration, who has repeatedly intervened to preserve the universe's right to its own chaotic evolution rather than impose the order that would make that evolution unnecessary. He speaks of the living tribunal, whose scales balance not justice as a fixed destination, but justice as a process, ongoing, imperfect, and irreplaceable precisely because its imperfection means it is always being tested. Your universe's justice, the surfer says carefully, is a verdict already delivered. Ours is a trial still in progress. That is not weakness. He meets Toppo's gaze directly. That is a different definition of the same word. On the ground, in a Nevada facility whose coordinates do not appear in any official registry, Ross's authorization has activated an asset that TLD does not know exists, and the Avengers would classify as a war crime if they did. The Weapon X extra-dimensional siphon array, built from recovered Phoenix Force containment technology, Sentry behavioral override architecture, and 3 years of black-budget research into the theoretical mechanics of power transfer from extra-dimensional sources, powers up for its first operational test. The science team running the array has been briefed on the target's energy signature, the Hakai readings, the power cosmic interaction data from Carol's absorption failure. They have built their extraction model around the one thing Carol's failure taught them. Hakai refuses to be absorbed by a living system because living systems exist within the universal laws that Hakai operates beneath. The array is not a living system, it is a machine, and machines, the lead scientist explains to Ross via encrypted channel, do not have the biological relationship to universal law that made Carol's absorption attempt self-defeating. Ross listens to the briefing with the focused patience of a man who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the technical team to finish explaining why it is achievable. How long until you can attempt extraction? He asks. The lead scientist consults her readout. We need him stationary for 90 seconds, ideally during a low-activity period. Ross looks at his tactical display. The surfer and Toppo, hovering, talking, the violet aura at its lowest output level since the breach. Stand by, he says quietly. Your window is opening. The Celestials arrive, or rather they become present, which is the more accurate description of how beings that exist partially outside conventional space-time manifest within it. 3 of them, their armored forms registering on every cosmic sensor in the solar system simultaneously as an event of critical universal significance. Not because their arrival produces an energy signature, but because their presence produces an absence of the ambient cosmic noise that fills the universe's background at all times, a silence in the fabric of existence that is legible to any sufficiently sensitive instrument as the equivalent of a very large, very old, very serious thing paying attention. They do not speak, they do not move toward the confrontation. They position themselves at the upper atmospheric boundary above Manhattan, and they observe, their attention carrying the particular quality of beings that have made civilization-level judgments across billions of years and are currently applying that same evaluative architecture to a single entity that arrived uninvited in their jurisdiction and has been, in their assessment, conducting an unauthorized audit. On the ground, every electronic instrument in the SHI-LD helicarrier flatlines for 11 seconds from the weight of their observation alone. Ross's tactical display goes dark, his Nevada channel cuts to static, and in those 11 seconds, while every human instrument is blind, Toppo looks up at the three vast armored presences above him. And for the first time since crossing the breach, experiences something that his entire existence was architecturally designed to never require. He looks at beings whose function mirrors his own, whose authority dwarfs his, whose judgment has shaped civilizations across geological time, and finds that he does not feel aligned with them. He feels the difference between their just ice and his, cold, specific, undeniable. The Celestials' observation lasts 47 seconds. When it ends, when they reposition to their prior atmospheric coordinates with the slow, vast deliberateness of beings adjusting a telescope rather than moving through space, the silence they leave behind is different from the silence that preceded their arrival. It carries something in it. Not a message, not a directive, not anything that any instrument or enhanced perception in the confrontation zone can decode with confidence. But Strange, who has spent his career reading the residual signatures of cosmic events, identifies it with the quiet certainty of professional recognition. It is the silence of beings that have reviewed the evidence and declined to deliver a verdict, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the verdict is not theirs to give, because the entity they are observing is not operating within their jurisdiction, because what Toppo carries came from a level of cosmic authority that the Celestials themselves answer to. And the Celestials are, with the immense dignity of beings that have never once been uncertain about their own place in the hierarchy, deferring. Strange opens the comm channel with the voice of a man transmitting a conclusion that he knows will change the tactical picture completely. The Celestials are not intervening, he says, not because they can't, because the authority Toppo carries outranks them in the hierarchy he comes from. A pause that stretches across the entire comm network as everyone processes this simultaneously. Which means, Tony Stark says slowly from his position at medium confrontation distance, repulsors still charged, probability models still running, there is no cavalry. Another pause. There was never going to be any cavalry. And above the city, Toppo turns his gaze back to the Silver Surfer. Because the Surfer just said something that the Celestials' deference has made more significant, not less. He said, a trial still in progress. And Toppo, for the first time since crossing the breach, is not certain he knows which side of that trial he is supposed to be on. The Nevada array fires at 9:23 a.m. Eastern Standard Time during the 47th second of the celestial observation window, in the 11-second gap when every electronic instrument in the SHI-LD helicarrier went dark and Ross's tactical display cut to static. This timing is not coincidental. Ross chose the window deliberately, the one moment in the entire engagement when Fury's oversight infrastructure was genuinely blind, when the Avengers' comm network was processing the celestial presence rather than monitoring secondary threat vectors, when the Silver Surfer's philosophical testimony had brought Toppo's aura to its lowest sustained output since arrival. The array fires a focused extraction beam from a relay satellite positioned in low Earth orbit, a beam designed not to strike Toppo physically but to interface with the Hawkeye energy signature at the quantum substrate level and begin drawing it outward, away from its source, toward a containment architecture built from Phoenix Force protocols and 3 years of black-budget theoretical physics. The beam reaches Toppo's position, makes contact with the outer edge of his aura, and for exactly 0.6 seconds, the extraction telemetry returns the result that Ross's science team predicted. Contact established. Transfer initiating. Then the aura responds. Not with the passive, structural refusal that defeated Carol's absorption attempt, not the quiet self-erasure of Hawkeye energy declining to inhabit a foreign system. What the array's extraction beam encounters after 0.6 seconds of apparent success is something categorically different. The full, deliberate attention of the being that power belongs to, turned toward the source of the extraction attempt. He, with the focused, absolute awareness of someone who just felt a hand reach into their chest. The satellite relay burns out in 0.3 seconds. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply ceased, its orbital debris footprint registering on tracking systems as 17 separate pieces of what used to be one coherent structure, now cooling metal in a decaying orbit. In the Nevada facility, every display goes white simultaneously. The lead scientist pulls her hands back from her console, stares at the readout. "It felt us," she says quietly. Ross, watching on the backup feed from a hardened command terminal, does not respond immediately. He watches the violet aura above Manhattan on his tactical display, watches it stop pulsing with its slow, deliberate rhythm and go still, the stillness of something that has been interrupted mid-thought and is now, with complete and terrible focus, identifying the source of the interruption. "Evacuate the facility," Ross says. His voice is the flat, controlled register of a man who made a calculation and is now living inside the margin of error. Immediately, Toppo turns. Not toward Nevada. He cannot locate the facility directly. The relay satellite's destruction severed the directional trace before the origin coordinates resolved. He turns toward the general vector of the extraction attempt, his eyes moving across the sky with the focused, hunting attention of a being whose entire nature is oriented toward the identification and assessment of threats to order. And what his assessment returns, in the clear and devastating language of a framework that has spent decades distinguishing between the various textures of moral failure, is not the signature of a defensive military response. It is the signature of attempted theft. Of a power structure within the universe he is judging that observed his presence, observed his restraint, observed the philosophical conversation currently in progress, and chose, in that window of apparent vulnerability, to attempt to weaponize him, to extract what he is and repurpose it for their own institutional agenda. The Silver Surfer, watching Toppo's expression change, feels the cosmic substrate shift beneath them with the abruptness of a temperature drop. The specific, unmistakable shift of a being whose deliberation has been interrupted by evidence that has just made the deliberation unnecessary. "Toppo," the surfer begins. The god of destruction aura ignites. It does not power up the way Marvel's heavy hitters power up. There is no dramatic energy surge, no roar, no visible light explosion announcing the transition. The change is quieter than that, and quieter is worse. The contained, throttled violet aura that Toppo has maintained since arrival, the version that tanked Thor's lightning and the Hulk's full-force assault while operating at approximately 12% output, simply releases. The throttle comes off. The deliberate, conscious effort he has been expending since the moment he stepped through the breach to keep his god of destruction nature compressed within a range that does not constitute an immediate extinction event for a populated urban area. That effort stops. His frame expands incrementally. The violet aura converts from its pulsing, breathing rhythm to a constant, blinding field that operates not as light, but as its opposite. A radius of total electromagnetic dominance that pulls photons inward rather than radiating them outward, making the space around him darker the brighter the aura becomes. The air pressure drops so sharply within a half-mile radius that every exposed surface frosts over in real time. Condensation crystallize it, gnawing on glass and metal and concrete simultaneously. And the sound, the constant, layered, overwhelming sound of a city and a battlefield and a dozen active power signatures operating in the same airspace, stops. Completely. Not muffled, not reduced. Stopped, as if someone reached into the physics of the area and removed the variable that makes noise possible. Tony Stark's HUD registers the output change and returns a number that makes him go very still inside the suit. Not the number itself. The number is simply beyond the scale his instruments were built to measure, expressed in his readout as a string of nines followed by a notation his system has never generated before. Overflow. Instrument ceiling reached. True value unknown. What stops him is the contextual calculation that follows automatically, the probability architecture that Friday runs against every new data input. Because the 12% figure she gave him 40 minutes ago was already registering as instrument overflow at certain frequency ranges, which means what is currently radiating from the figure above Manhattan is not 12% of something larger. It is the baseline of something that has no ceiling his instruments can find, now operating without the conscious suppression that made 12% the observable figure. "Friday," he says, and his voice has the particular quiet of someone asking a question they already know the answer to. Revised threat assessment. Friday processes for 1.1 seconds. "Boss," she says carefully, "I think we should leave." Thor launches before the order arrives because Thor has never in his 1,000-year life waited for an order to engage a threat that is actively escalating, and he is not going to establish that precedent today. He goes in with everything. Every volt of lightning the storm system above Manhattan can produce, every ounce of Asgardian divine authority channeled through Mjolnir, the full inheritance of a bloodline that has stood against world-ending threats since before most of Earth's civilizations could write. The lightning detonates against Toppo's expanded aura in a cascade that lights the entire cloud cover from within. A sustained discharge visible from space as a bright, brief flare on the North American continent. The kind of energy release that would register on seismographs as a geological event. Thor is flung backward. Not 11 miles this time. The trajectory tracking puts him at 34 miles before Mjolnir's return arc catches his momentum, and when his comm reconnects, his voice carries the very specific, very controlled register of a warrior who has just updated his threat assessment to a category he has never had to use before. "He is holding back nothing," Thor reports. 3 words. No tactical recommendation, because there is no tactical recommendation. Carol goes binary without hesitation and does not attempt contact, does not attempt absorption. She builds the most powerful directed concussive beam in her arsenal, white hole frequency at maximum sustainable output, aimed not at Toppo, but at the expanding edge of the Hawkeye field, attempting containment rather than engagement. The beam pushes. For 4 extraordinary seconds, it actually pushes, the field's expansion decelerating measurably against the binary output. The mathematics of the engagement briefly suggesting an equilibrium that makes every analyst watching the tactical feed lean forwards, simultaneously. Then the Hawkeye field reaches the beam's forward edge and begins consuming it from the point of contact backward, not absorbing the energy, not redirecting it, unmaking the beam's existence 1 meter at a time, working its way back toward the source with the patient, absolute thoroughness of a process that does not experience urgency because it has never encountered resistance it needed to hurry past. Carol cuts the beam at 30 meters. Her binary reserves are at 11%. She pulls back. On the comm, her breathing is controlled and deliberate and communicates everything that her words do not. The Hawkeye sphere erupts from Toppo's position in all directions simultaneously. Not a weapon aimed at enemies, not a demonstration constructed for an audience, but the ambient field of a god of destruction operating at genuine capacity. The power expression of a being whose fundamental nature is the erasure of what the universe has determined should not continue. It expands outward in a perfect, terrible sphere, the boundary between existence and absence moving across Manhattan airspace at a speed that the evacuation perimeter was never designed to account for. A drone array dissolves at the leading edge. A Quinjet that failed to clear the radius in time ceases. Not explodes, not crashes, ceases. Its transponder signal cutting to silence on every tracking system simultaneously, leaving a gap in the telemetry that every operator stares at for 1 second before the implication arrives. Strange throws a dimensional barrier at the field's outer boundary. Not to stop it, the lesson of the past 40 minutes has been absorbed completely, but to slow it, to buy seconds, to give the evacuation coordination another margin. The barrier holds for 6 seconds before losing its color and dissolving. The surfer pours power cosmic into the gap. The field slows again. In 3 seconds, 4, 5. And in those seconds, the evacuation coordination moves 800 people past the new perimeter edge. Then the power cosmic contribution reaches its sustainable limit, and the field resumes its expansion. And Toppo, at the center of all of it, his eyes closed, the god of destruction aura blazing in absolute silence around him, raises both arms wide. And then, in the specific, world-altering beat that every person present will remember with perfect clarity for the rest of their lives, stops. The sphere holds at its current radius, does not advance, does not retract, vibrates at the boundary of its own completion like a held breath that has not yet decided whether to release. The silence, absolute, digital, the 0 dB silence of a universe that has just been shown what it is standing in front of, stretches across the entire battlefield. And somewhere in that silence, beneath the weight of a power that has no ceiling and a judgment that has not yet been delivered, the Silver Surfer does the only thing left to do. He moves into the sphere's radius alone. No barrier, no power cosmic raised in defense. Just a being that has stood in the path of world-ending forces before and learned at extraordinary cost that the only thing capable of stopping an absolute force is an absolute question. He looks at Toppo and speaks into the silence with the full weight of everything this universe has survived. "Before you finish this," he says quietly, "let me show you why it survived." The Silver Surfer stands inside the Hawkeye sphere and does not dissolve. That fact alone, that simple, defiant, physically inexplicable fact, changes the quality of Toppo's attention in a way that nothing in the preceding 90 minutes of engagement has managed. Thor's lightning changed his posture. Carol's binary field changed his output. Strange's magic changed his assessment. But the Silver Surfer standing inside the active field of a god of destruction operating at full capacity, standing there not because he cannot feel what surrounds him, but precisely because he can. This changes something deeper. It changes the question. Because a being that walks voluntarily into erasure, carrying no weapon and no defense, is not making a tactical statement. It is making a philosophical one. It is saying, with its body and its stillness and its complete absence of self-protective instinct, what I am about to tell you matters more than whether I survive telling it. Toppo has spent his entire existence among beings willing to die for their convictions. He has never, until this moment, stood across from a being willing to die for someone else's. The Hawkeye field pulses once around the Surfer, does not advance. Toppo opens his eyes. The power cosmic activates, not as a weapon, not as a barrier, but as a record. The Surfer raises one hand, and the universe's own memory responds, images forming in the air between them with the fidelity of a being that has witnessed history from the vantage point of a cosmic observer for centuries. Not curated highlights, not propaganda, the complete, unedited record of Earth 666's survival. Every time this universe should have ended and did not, presented without commentary, without framing, without the editorial architecture of a being trying to win an argument. The first Avengers assembling from a standing start, from no shared history and no unified doctrine, responding to a threat that required exactly the kind of chaotic, individual, undisciplined heroism that Toppo's framework classifies as symptomatic of structural failure. Tony Stark in a cave, building something impossible from inadequate materials, motivated entirely by the stubborn refusal of a morally compromised man to allow his worst decisions to be his final ones. Steve Rogers, 90 pounds of conviction before the serum, the same conviction after it, choosing, repeatedly, to stand against forces that his universe's own institutions had decided were acceptable compromises. The Surfer does not narrate. He lets the record speak in the language that transcends doctrine, the language of consequence survived. This universe, the Surfer says when the images have finished, has been to the edge of its own erasure 17 times in the past century alone. His voice is level, not emotional, not persuasive in the conventional sense, carrying instead the flat authority of a being presenting data it has personally witnessed. 17 distinct extinction-level events, cosmic, biological, political, existential. He holds Toppo's gaze. It survived every one of them, not through order, not through absolute justice enforced from above, through the specific, irreplaceable mechanism of individual beings making individual choices to stand when standing was not required. He pauses. Your universe has never faced an extinction-level event that its justice system could not resolve. You do not know what a civilization looks like when it has nothing left but the choice to continue. You have never had to know. The words land with the precision of a diagnosis delivered by someone who is not enjoying being right. What you are calling corruption, the Surfer says quietly, is what a universe looks like when it has been tested at every layer of its existence and has refused, at every layer, to stop. It is the word refused that moves through Toppo's framework like a fault line activating. Not the concept. He knows refusal, has built his entire existence around the refusal to allow disorder to go unanswered. But the direction of it. His refusal has always been external, directed outward, at the forces threatening order, at the entropy that his justice exists to contain. What the surfer is describing is a universe whose refusal is directed inward, not against external threats but against its own despair, its own accumulated damage, its own perfectly reasonable statistical probability of simply stopping. He stands inside the silence of his own suspended judgment and runs that distinction through every framework his training has given him, looking for the category it belongs to, the precedent it maps against, the doctrinal response it should trigger, and finds, in the cold, specific, irreversible way that a structural discovery finds you, that there is no category. That the Pride Troopers of Universe 11, in all their centuries of absolute justice, have never had to develop a framework for a civilization that keeps choosing to exist despite having excellent reasons not to. Because in Universe 11, civilizations that reach that point are purged before the choice becomes necessary. The thing he is looking at right now, the messy, fractured, heroically stubborn survival record of Earth 616, is what the universe looks like when the purge doesn't happen. And it is, with a clarity that arrives without his permission, extraordinary. General Ross. Nick Fury's voice cuts across every active comm channel simultaneously, not the controlled tactical register he has maintained throughout the engagement, but something stripped of its professional management, flat and absolute and carrying the full weight of a man who has just received a complete intelligence picture and is responding to it with the particular fury of someone whose operation was compromised from the inside. Stand down the Nevada array, recall the Weapon X authorization, and prepare to explain to me in detail how you managed to conduct an unauthorized weapons test on an extra-dimensional entity during an active diplomatic engagement using black-budget technology built from classified Shai-ELD research from a facility that does not exist in any registry I have security clearance for. The silence on Ross's channel lasts 4 seconds. Director Fury. Ross begins, his voice carrying the composed, bureaucratic authority of a man who is prepared for this conversation and believes his position is defensible. The Sokovia Accords, paragraph 31, authorizes the Secretary of State to Ross. Fury's voice does not rise. The surfer is currently preventing the erasure of Manhattan. I will deal with you when the city is still standing. But understand clearly, the moment this engagement resolves, you are done. Another silence. Longer. Then, with the particular quiet of a man recalibrating his immediate tactical position while preserving his long-term ones, standing down the array. Thor descends into the confrontation zone with the deliberateness of a being that has decided what it needs to say and has chosen its moment with the care of someone who understands that timing, in a situation this fragile, is not a secondary consideration. He takes position near the surfer, close enough to be heard, far enough to avoid the implication of pressure. And he speaks without preamble, without the formal Asgardian authority that he deployed in the engagement's opening moments. What he uses instead is something that costs more and carries further. His own history. I was born a god, he says, and his voice in the silence of the held sphere carries the quality of a confession being made to an audience that includes himself. I inherited authority I did not earn, over a civilization I had not built, in a universe that had already decided what I was before I made a single choice that mattered. He holds Toppo's gaze across the gap between them. For 1,000 years, I believed that inheritance was justice, that being born into the right to judge meant the judgments I made were right. He pauses, and the pause carries the full weight of Mjolnir lying on the ground of a ruined Oklahoma town, immovable, while a man who had lost everything. He was stood in the rain and failed to lift it. It was not until I lost everything, the power, the throne, the absolute certainty that I knew what this universe needed, that I became capable of actually seeing it. His eyes do not leave Toppo's. Your justice brought you here. What you are feeling right now, that fracture, that doubt, that thing your doctrine has no category for. That is not a failure of your justice. He pauses once more. That is your justice becoming real. The Hakai sphere contracts, millimeter by millimeter, with the slow, controlled deliberateness of a being that has made a decision and is implementing it with the full awareness of what reversing it costs. Because gods of destruction do not reverse, do not reconsider, do not allow the doctrine that defines them to be complicated by the testimony of the thing they were sent to judge. Toppo is doing all three simultaneously, in full view of 2 universes worth of observers, at a cost that only he can fully calculate. The contraction takes 47 seconds. When it is complete, the aura returns to its arrival state, present, enormous, leashed, and the city outside its former radius erupts into sound again. Car alarms and sirens and voices and the 1,000-layered noise of a civilization that just survived something it cannot name. On every screen, on every platform, in 43 languages, the comment sections that went silent 11 minutes ago begin moving again. Strange, hovering at the confrontation perimeter with his hands finally lowered at his sides, watches the sphere's contraction complete and feels, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent 90 minutes building contingency plans for outcomes that did not arrive, something he is not immediately able to identify. It takes him a moment, then he places it. Relief, followed immediately, with the chi, characteristic ruthlessness of his analytical mind, by the recognition that relief is premature, because Toppo's aura has contracted, but it has not left, and the expression on his face is not resolution. It is the expression of a being that has arrived at a new question, and has not yet decided whether this universe's answer to it will be sufficient. "Show me," Toppo says. 2 words, quiet, carrying the full compressed weight of a verdict in the process of being rewritten by a being that has never rewritten one before. Not a request, not a concession. The statement of a judge who has heard testimony that has not changed the facts of the case but has fundamentally altered the framework within which the facts are being evaluated. He looks at the Silver Surfer, at Thor, at Strange hovering at the perimeter edge with his hands at his sides and his composure intact through what is clearly a significant act of sustained professional will. He looks at the gap in the skyline where the building used to stand, that clean, permanent absence, his only irreversible mark on this universe, the shape of a decision he made with complete certainty and is now carrying with complete accountability. Then his gaze moves across the evacuation perimeter, the crowds, the screens, the 43 languages of comment sections beginning to move again, the Sao Paulo fan editor's hope and terror footage looping on 1,000 feeds simultaneously. And something in that panoramic assessment shifts the weight of what he carries from evidence of corruption to something he does not yet have a word for, something that Universe 11, with its perfect justice and its absolute order and its civilizations that never reach the point of choosing to continue because they are purged before the choice becomes necessary, something that Universe 11 has never produced in him before. The specific, overwhelming, structurally destabilizing recognition that what he is looking at is not a disease he was sent to cure. It is a miracle he was sent to witness, and he almost erased it. Nobody moves for a long time after Toppo speaks those 2 words. The battlefield holds its collective breath with the specific, fragile stillness of a situation that everyone present understands can shatter in any direction from the smallest unexpected input. The wrong word, the wrong movement, the wrong micro-expression on the wrong face, tipping the scales back towards something that the past 90 minutes have established cannot be stopped once it fully commits. The Hakai aura pulses around Toppo in its contained, leashed rhythm, present, vast, choosing its restraint in real time, which is simultaneously more reassuring and more terrifying than any fixed limit would be. Because a fixed limit is a wall, what surrounds him is a decision, and decisions, unlike walls, require continuous maintenance. Strange, hovering at the confrontation perimeter with his hands finally at his sides, runs the probability architecture in his sorcerer's perception with the focused desperation of a man who has learned in the past 90 minutes that his conventional frameworks are structurally insufficient and is attempting, in real time, to build a new one. The architecture returns one consistent result across every variable he tests. The next 30 seconds will determine the next 30 years. Strange steps forward, not because he has a plan. The past 90 minutes have systematically dismantled every plan he arrived with, but because the situation requires someone to bridge the silence between Toppo's two words and a response worthy of them. And Strange has spent his entire career as Sorcerer Supreme, standing in the gaps that nobody else could stand in. "Redemption in this universe," he says, and his voice carries the stripped, precise quality of a man who has decided that anything other than complete honesty is an insult to the moment. Does not look like perfection. It never has. It does not look like order achieved and maintained without cost. He gestures toward the gap in the skyline. That clean, 40-story absence, the most honest monument the day has produced, and holds the gesture until Toppo's gaze follows it. It looks like that. A wound that cannot be undone. A cost that is carried forward rather than erased. He lowers his hand. And then it looks like the choice to continue anyway. To absorb the damage into the ongoing experiment of existence and allow it to change the experiment rather than end it. He pauses. That is not a lesser form of justice. It is a harder one. It asks more of the beings practicing it than absolute certainty ever could. Because certainty is easy. His voice drops to something private and precise. Continuing without it is the whole difficulty. Toppo is silent for a duration that the tactical displays later record as 41 seconds, an eternity in the context of an engagement where 41 seconds has repeatedly been sufficient time for the situation to change categories entirely. He is not performing deliberation. He is actually deliberating in the full, costly, structurally demanding sense of a being that has received testimony it cannot dismiss, cannot reframe, and cannot absorb into existing doctrine without the doctrine changing. He looks at the gap in the skyline, at the surfer, at Thor, who has said the truest thing anyone has said to him in decades and paid for its truth with the particular cost of honesty about one's own failures. He looks at Strange, who just defined redemption in a way that has no equivalent concept in Universe 11's entire moral vocabulary. Not because Universe 11 is inferior, but because a universe that purges its failures before they compound never develops the language for what it looks like to carry them forward. He looks, finally, at the evacuation perimeter, the crowds, the screens, the hundreds of thousands of lives that exist in the space between what he was capable of and what he chose. And the calculation that his framework produces is not the one he expected to produce when he stepped through the breach this morning. It is not this universe should be purged. It is not even this universe should be spared. It is something he has never calculated before, in a career defined by the absolute clarity of its calculations. It is, this universe should be witnessed. "I came here to judge," Toppo says, and the quiet of his voice in the open air carries the weight of an institution revising its own foundational document. "I have judged." His eyes move slowly across the assembled faces. Strange, the surfer, Thor, the distant figures of Carol and the Hulk at the perimeter edge, Tony Stark hovering at medium distance with his repulsors still charged and his probability models still running, because Tony Stark does not stand down until the debrief is complete, and sometimes not even then. This universe is exactly what my assessment indicated. Fractured, inconsistent, structurally incapable of achieving the order that Universe 11 maintains as a baseline standard. He pauses, and the pause carries the full weight of what follows. It is also something my assessment did not have a category for. His gaze settles on the gap in the skyline one final time. It is a civilization that has been shown repeatedly across every scale of its existence that it is not sufficient, and has chosen repeatedly to continue anyway. He looks back at Strange.
In Universe 11, we would call that irrational. The faintest shift moves across his expression. Not a smile, something more complicated than a smile. The expression of a being encountering an emotion its vocabulary cannot fully contain. I find I do not have a better word for it than brave. He turns toward the tear, the dimensional scar that has held itself open in the upper atmosphere since his arrival, maintained by the residual energy of his crossing, waiting with the patience of a wound that knows it will eventually be closed. Before he moves toward it, he speaks one final time, and his voice carries the quality of a verdict being delivered in full awareness that the defendant will continue to exist after the courtroom empties. which is a quality that Toppo of Universe 11 has never had to build into a verdict before today. "This universe is not beyond redemption," he says. "I have seen the evidence. I accept the testimony." He looks directly at the Silver Surfer. "But I am leaving something behind, not a punishment, not a warning in the conventional sense." His aura pulses once, slowly, with the rhythm of something enormous and deliberate. A measurement. The gap in your skyline is permanent. Hakai does not leave residue, but it leaves absence, and absence is its own record. He looks at Strange. Every time your civilization looks at that gap, it will have a choice: to rebuild around it and forget what it cost, or to leave it empty and remember what it almost was. He holds Strange's gaze for a moment. "I will be interested, from wherever I am, to see which choice you make." He ascends toward the tier slowly, without theater, without any of the dramatic staging that this moment would seem to demand from a being of his scale. No final display of power, no parting demonstration of what he chose not to do, just a being of incalculable authority moving through the atmosphere of a universe that is still standing, in the particular manner of someone who has completed a task that turned out to be more complicated than the briefing indicated, and is carrying the complication home rather than resolving it cleanly. The Celestials watch his ascent in silence. The Silver Surfer watches. The Avengers watch. And below the perimeter, the evacuation crowds watch a violet figure grow smaller against the pale morning sky until it reaches the tear, pauses for one unremarkable complete moment, and steps through. The tier seals behind him with the quiet finality of a sentence ending. The sky above Manhattan is just sky again. The city exhales, and the sound of it, the return of sirens, voices, distant car alarms, the thousand-layered noise of a civilization reasserting its own existence, is the most beautiful thing anyone on that battlefield has heard all morning. In Washington, General Thaddeus Ross is escorted from the helicarrier Iliad by two SHIELD agents carrying a Fury-authorized detainment order at 10:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. He does not resist, does not argue, walks between the agents with the composed, calculating expression of a man who has already begun identifying the legal frameworks within which this outcome is recoverable, who has already begun the internal political arithmetic of which alliances to activate and which debts to call in. The Secretary of State authorization that enabled the Nevada Array, the Weapon X-Files, the Black Budget Extra-Dimensional Siphon research, all of it will take months to fully surface in formal proceedings, longer still to adjudicate, and longer still to fully attribute to a decision chain that Ross has spent 30 years building to distribute accountability outward from its center. He knows this. He is counting on it. What he does not account for, what the political arithmetic he is running in the back of the transport does not include, is that Nick Fury has the Nevada facility's complete operational record, the satellite relay's activation timestamp, and 47 seconds of tactical display footage showing the precise moment Ross ordered the array to fire during a celestial observation blackout while an active philosophical negotiation was in progress. The morning news cycle will be, in the technical sense of the term, thorough. It is Strange who says the thing that matters most, and he says it 3 hours later, alone in the Sanctum Sanctorum, with the day's engagement replaying in the eye of Agamotto and a cup of tea going cold on the desk beside him. He has reviewed the footage 17 times, has cross-referenced Toppo's final statements against every philosophical framework in his archive, has run the probability calculations on what the engagement would have produced if the Nevada Array had fired 30 seconds earlier, or if Thor had waited for communication rather than leading with Mjolnir, or if Ross had succeeded in extracting even a fragment of Hakai energy into an architecture designed to weaponize it. The calculations are not comforting. He has reviewed them anyway because Strange has learned, across a career defined by looking directly at the things that are difficult to look at, that the discomfort of accurate assessment is always preferable to the comfort of incomplete one. And what the complete assessment returns, what he sits with in the quiet of the sanctum as the city outside begins the slow, complicated work of processing what happened to it, is not the relief that Toppo is gone, not the satisfaction of a threat resolved. It is the cold, honest, specific recognition that everything Toppo said about this universe was accurate. The fractures are real. The cycles are real.
The gap between what this civilization's protectors intend and what their actions cost, demonstrated today with painful clarity by a Secretary of State who attempted to steal a god of destruction's power during an active ceasefire, is real. Toppo was wrong about the sentence, about the method, about the authority of an external being to impose judgment on a universe that did not request it. He was wrong about all of that. But the diagnosis. Strange stares at the gap in the skyline through the sanctum window. That clean, permanent 40-story absence in the middle of the city he has sworn to protect. And holds the diagnosis without flinching. The diagnosis was accurate. Outside, the city is already debating whether to rebuild on the empty lot or leave it as a monument. The vote, according to the first polls emerging from the social media ecosystem that never actually stopped running throughout the entire engagement, is running approximately 60-40 in favor of rebuilding. Strange looks at that number for a long time. Then he looks at the gap and thinks, that is exactly what Toppo meant. Somewhere between the universes, crossing the cold, dark membrane of the dimensional boundary, carrying a verdict more complicated than the one he arrived with. Toppo carries something that Universe 11 has never given him before. Not doubt, not failure. The specific, irreversible weight of a question that absolute justice cannot answer. What do you do with a civilization that deserves to be judged and chooses to survive the judgment anyway? He does not have the answer. He suspects, with the slow, careful honesty of a being learning to carry uncertainty for the first time, that the answer is not available in Universe 11's doctrine, that finding it will require something his training has never demanded of him, that it will require him to watch, to wait, to allow the messy, fractured, heroically stubborn experiment of Earth 616 to run, without his intervention, without his certainty, without the comfort of a verdict that closes the file, and to accept that witnessing is its own form of justice. Perhaps the hardest form. The tear seals, the sky is clear, the gap remains, justice is simple, universes are not, and the distance between those two facts is where everything that matters actually lives.